The structure of this presentation is slightly unusual. It's a mixture of a case study and a workshop. And we are going to do some exercises. So what I would encourage you, please come down and join folks at the tables. If you're sitting in the back, we're going to work together as tables, as groups, and that's what will help you get the most out of this. So please come on down and pick a table and join them. This presentation came out of some work that I did about a year and a half ago to 2 years ago, and I'll talk to you about it in as much detail as I can. There are a few constraints, however. I'm not legally permitted to tell you who the client is and exactly what they're working on and so on, but I'll give you a good sense of the setting and of the problems that they faced. So I can't really give you the name of the client. I can't really give you the exact details. This was work for a major television network in New York City. Take my word for it, you've seen their programs. And this was for the digital group at that organization. A very large organization. They had a rather large income stream, about $5 billion a year. This is the digital group, a relatively small group in the company, about $40 million a year of direct revenue impact. But when you talk to people at the company, they tell you that digital is the future. And some of them even say, if anybody tells you digital is the future, they're already wrong. It's the present. Now, that's a rather strong statement with that imbalance, right? So what's going on? Well, this is a small group. They have a product vision. They're going to develop these direct-to-consumer products. They're going to develop products that support their existing systems, the websites, the other groups that they distribute through, such as cable providers. And they have about 9 teams all working together. The main distribution channels are cable providers and OTT, which is set-top boxes. They're in a space which we'll talk about in a moment, but it's undergoing a lot of disruption. How many people here are familiar at all with this industry? Anybody? So it's an advertising-based industry, right? And in 2014, industry-wide, ad revenues fell 25%. So think about that for a moment. That's a rather severe disruption, and that's just 1 year. So we'll talk about that more in a minute. Let me get a sense of who's here. How many people here are involved in coaching? That's a lot. Okay, how many people are involved in managing teams in an agile setting? That's many more than the last time I gave this talk. How many people are on teams doing agile? Okay. How many people are from the product side of an organization? How many people are from a technology side of an organization? Okay, that's a good mix. All right, so we have quite a mix. So again, you'll do better at the tables if you work together. Let's make a little workspace. So clear out some space on your table and make room for 4 quadrants. Just mark north so that we know where our orientation is, and we'll go around and fill in the quadrants. All right, now we have a lot of coaches in the room, so you'll all be familiar with this. When you first go into an organization, you have to understand what their pain points are, right? You can't get anywhere without that. So what are the pain points in this industry? Well, I talked about one of them a moment ago. Severe disruption. They have a lot across, in this particular industry, they have this business model that's kind of going to pieces right in front of them. One of the senior executives I talked to there said, you know, I wish this were happening 10 years down the road because I'd be close to retirement by then. But as it is, I have to figure out how to get through all of this. They also have a couple of standard problems, like the unpredictable lead times to delivery of new product, right? That's very similar to what David talked about last talk. They also have particular things in their world, like dependencies among, across the teams and shared resources, okay? And that's something that we'll talk about as we go. But the main thing for them is that they have this $5 billion a year revenue stream that's attached to a business model that's under attack, right? Their business model is perhaps not viable. And yet they have contracts that run out 10 or 15 years with all the distribution channels. So they're looking at this and saying, man, we got fat margins, we got this huge revenue stream, and we may not even be around in 10 years. It's scary business. You all have similar experience with pain points in your roles. Let's fill in one of the quadrants. So I want you to look at what your top pain points are with your portfolio of products and label the northeast quadrant in your workspace pain points and slap some ideas down there. Just write them out yourself and then put them down, discuss them with your team, and do a quick ranking. Take a couple minutes for that. Okay, there's your 2 minutes. So who wants to share the top pain point that they came up with? Anybody? Yes? Reactive, not proactive. Okay, excellent. Who else wants to share one of the pain points? Shared resources. Time to implement. You got another? Focus on too many things, or lack of focus on too many things. Yes? Change in the organization. What kind of change do you have in mind? Constant reorganization, so no one has sure footing within the organization? Excellent point. Enterprise alignment. Okay, excellent.
No portfolio.
No portfolio. Okay, yeah, sometimes you go in and you say, hey, where can I find the portfolio view? Where do I look? And they say, well, I don't know. Or one person says, well, here's mine. The other person says, well, here's mine. And you look at them and, there's probably some overlap. Lack of product ownership resources. Okay, these are all really good examples. There are a lot of pain points, and you have to understand the pain points in order to get anywhere with Agile implementations, right? And so we're going to try to tie everything else we do to the pain points here, so keep that in mind. So I want to talk about 3 fundamental concepts in this context: transparency, prioritization, and alignment. Those, to me, are the three key concepts for good portfolio management. And I would say, actually, it extends a little more broadly. You could apply these at the team level. But to me, the team level is relatively well understood, right? We've all, as an industry, been working very hard and very effectively at how to stand up Agile teams, how to help them perform well. But step up a level and look at the program or portfolio, and all bets are off, right? Completely different story. Not very much in the way of standard practice, not very much in the way of good, reliable mechanisms for implementing change. There are attempts out there now. Some people are talking about safe, some people are talking about less. I'm not going to delve into those questions today, but I am going to tell you about what we did with this one company to try to help them at that level. So let's talk about each of these in turn. Let's start with transparency. So transparency is one of those things that you introduce at the team level when you set up a Scrum team, right? They become transparent in what work is in progress, in where they are in that, in how much they completed versus how much they committed to complete. So how do people react? How do people on the team react when you introduce transparency like that? It terrifies them, right? They say, I'm totally exposed. I'm standing here and, somebody's going to come in and abuse me for not getting enough done. And you have to work through it with them, right? You have to make sure that they understand this is their part of the bargain. They're providing transparency to the stakeholders. And what do the stakeholders have to do in response? They have to accept that they're now seeing the ugly truth rather than the pretty fiction. And that's the price they pay for making fully informed decisions. There's no other way. So they can't go and abuse the people at the team level because otherwise they're going to get the fiction again. So if they want the truth, they have to accept the truth. And you can work with stakeholders and teams and develop that new relationship between the two. Now, what happens when you introduce transparency at the portfolio level? How do people react to that? They're terrified. They feel totally exposed. They think some executive is going to come down and say, what the hell is this? So it's exactly the same reaction for similar reasons, right? It's just at higher stakes. And in this case, if you're helping to coach them through this, you have to work with them and say, remember we did this with the teams. Remember you were on the other side of this with the teams. And you helped to form a new relationship with the teams that made this work. And then you had the truth so you could make your decisions. Well, now you're doing the same with your stakeholders further up in the organization. So you have to work with them through that. And again, it's about providing the ugly truth and avoiding the pretty fiction and making sure that everybody sees that truth together in that one place, and then they can all make decisions on the basis of the same facts. Otherwise, everyone's pretending. So let's do a couple quick exercises about this. So I want you to label the southeast quadrant of your space with transparency, and then write out some examples to discuss with your table where lack of transparency hurts you. And if you can, tie it to one of the pain points that you have. Maybe some of them will stand alone, but try to tie them to the pain points if you can. And we'll spend 2 minutes on that. Go. Right, so there's your 2 minutes. So anyone want to share one of those? Where is lack of transparency hurting you? You want to share also?
Sure. It's a demotivational for the teams if they don't know what they're doing or how are they contributing to the end goal of the business.
Okay, great. So there's a good implicit point here that transparency is a two-way street, right? And it has to also be about transparency of the vision and so on. In this case, that wasn't in play with this organization because they did have a vision. However, oftentimes you go into an organization and they really need to develop that vision. They don't have it, or everybody has their own, and it's not visible to the rest of the company. Great. Who else has one? An example? Yes? Prioritization of the projects for maximum business value. Great. Anybody else? Shadow projects or injects. Yeah. I usually call those black ops because they're there somewhere in the background, some surreptitious exercise in something. Prioritizing at a tactical level rather than a strategic level. Okay. Again, excellent example. So let's take another 2 minutes and say, what would improved transparency look like for you? So put those in the same quadrant. You can distinguish them somehow if you need to, and spend 2 minutes on that. Just say, how could we do better on the transparency front? What would that look like? All right, there's your 2 minutes. So, anybody have one that's leaping off their table they want everyone to know? Communicate. Okay, that's pretty broad. Important, but pretty broad. Yes? So focus on the right things. Yeah, there's big value in a backlog, I say, primarily because things drop off the bottom, right? Not because they're bad ideas, but because they're not good enough. And that's precisely what gives you focus. And it's really hard, especially at the leadership level, for people to wrap their heads around the idea that losing things out of the backlog is actually beneficial, right? Communicate on actual budgets and actual timelines. You had one.
We talked about KPIs, clear KPIs, and then a clear business strategy and vision.
Okay, clear KPIs and clear strategy and vision. These are all over the place, right? There are a lot of things. There's a lot of impact to transparency. Let me tell you what the major thing that we did here was. We introduced Portfolio Kanban where we had a lane per team. And all of the major items were represented here. And major meant sufficiently large initiative or initiative that involved multiple teams. And this was the primary visibility that we added. In this particular company, we had a stroke of luck because the senior VP, who was not the sponsor but the sponsor's boss, said, yes, use my office glass for this. So we put it right in front of him. And this meant every single conversation that took place at that board took place in front of him. And he got up and walked out of his office and joined a lot of them. So when you do this, make it prominent. Put it in a place where everybody sees it. Don't hide it off in a corner somewhere. Don't put it in a conference room. Put it out in front of everyone so that it becomes a standard point of conversation, right? So that was a big plus for us. And we used a physical board with cards on the board. We didn't do any tooling. People were talking about tools at the beginning. And my view of tools is if you adopt a tool immediately, people will do what the tool makes easy and avoid what the tool makes hard. If you use pen and paper, you'll bend the tool to your purpose. So start with pen and paper because it's perfectly intuitive. Figure out what you need and then look at tools later. But start simple. I'm a big fan of stupid simple. This is stupid simple, right? There's a new column where you park new stuff. There's a column per team. And we learned a few things about this. One is it's really important to set this up fast. Setting this up will take you longer than you think. This is not an exercise for a day. This is going to take you a couple weeks minimum, I would guess. Surprising, but true. The second thing you'll find is that it freaks people out because there's so many things on the board. And you'll start to hear pushback like, we can't set that up. There's so many things. How can we look at this? And you have to have those conversations. If you can't look at this and set this up here, how in the world do you expect to implement all of this stuff? How do you expect to manage all of this stuff? This is the easy part, right? Another thing is to humanize it. So we put this up and then we tried an experiment. We took pictures of the teams and put them at the top of each column. And that made a huge difference in shaping the conversation around these things. It put a human face on it. People stopped saying resources and started naming names and talking about people. So the entire tone of the conversation changed for the better. So humanize it, put a face on it. This is especially important if you have distributed teams where you don't see everybody all the time, right? Make sure that it has a human face. Now, not everything worked. I think it's always important to inject into a presentation like this things that didn't work in addition to things that did work. Early on, we thought, we're going to use an opportunity canvas as the basic entry on this board, a la Jeff Patton and Marty Kagan. And that bombed horribly. The product owners just rejected it. I mean, a couple of them tried it, and I said to them, do the 15-minute version. It doesn't have to take long. And they balked. So that was an utter fail. So we just dropped it. We said, okay, that doesn't work for you. We'll figure out what information we need there. We'll talk about that in a minute. So that's what we did for this. So I hope that you're building some ideas that you can apply in your context the way we did here. So prioritization is next. So this is a key to maintenance, right? We already started talking about the fact that things dropping off the bottom of a backlog is actually beneficial. That's only going to happen if you prioritize, right? Now, one of the first things that happened in this case is that senior VP with the board on his wall walked out of the office one day and read this, and he said two things. He said, we've had this information for a long time. It's just scattered all over the place. It's in 5 different places. This is the first time I've ever seen it in one place. And the second thing he said was, why are we doing that? And there was our first win, right there. That was it. We were able to drop something. That thing got simpler. And so you always have to look for that opportunity, and that impulse to throw things away and the argument, genuine argument that took place around it, that was wonderfully clarifying. That really helped us. So that's about prioritization. So what I want to do is collect a set of prioritization methods. So I'd like to ask you to, if you have one that you use, I'd like to get 8 or 10 of these. If you have one that you know, stand up and shout it out, and I'll just take notes. Go ahead. Business value. WSJF, weighted shortest job first. Loudest stakeholder. Most annoying stakeholder. I'm lumping those together. What else? Member satisfaction? Customer satisfaction. Product owner says so. Alignment to company goals. What was that? PICK.
Give everybody $100 so they can spend whatever they want.
So buy a feature. Okay, we got a bunch of those. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Couple more? Impact versus effort. Cost to build. Okay. ROI. Okay, I'm running out of room here. Cost to delay. Okay, I'm going to squeeze that in somewhere. There are a lot. How many? Let me do a quick survey of preference. How many think cost to delay is what they prefer? Just raise your hand. You can vote more than once. It's not a... We got 2. Okay, that's almost 0. How about business value? That looks like about half of the people. How about weighted shortest job first? I got a few. All right, how about loudest stakeholder? That's about the same. Customer satisfaction? A bunch of you. Maybe a third. Product owner says so. Remember, we're talking portfolio here, not team, so that's an odd one in this setting. Alignment with the business goals. Sure. Yeah, vote more than once. You can vote for all of them. We'll just pencil you in. How about pick? You're not voting for the one you... We'll talk about it after over happy hour. Okay, buy a feature. I got a few hands for that. How about impact versus effort? Okay. Okay, we're splitting votes here. Cost to build. All right, and ROI. Okay, that was about half. The one that I didn't hear that I think is more common than any other, it's almost there but not quite, is highest paid person's opinion. Right? Almost every organization I've ever walked into as a coach actually does highest paid person's opinion. So, why? Fear, attempted alignment in this sort of hierarchical way. You know, lack of metrics for any of the other. Capitulation. They promise the customer, right? So it's sales driven. The sales guys have gone and sold something, and then they say, well, we're already committed. You know, you can't back out now. It's way too late. So there are a lot of these. My contention is this, that it's better to have one than not to have one. Even if your method of prioritization is HIPPO, highest paid person's opinion, that's better than not having a method of prioritization and just doing it all ad hoc. Why? Well, if you have a very metrics-based method of prioritization, it can become predictable. But even if it's not metrics-based and not predictable, at least it can become anticipatable, right? And you can do that even with highest paid person's opinion. You can go and have the conversation with that person and get a sense and have some idea of how things are going to shake out. So let's label the southwest quadrant prioritization. And what I want you to do as a table is choose a method and then write out what information you would need in order to support that method. Okay? Because different methods require different things. If you're using HIPPO, you need access to that person with the highly paid opinion, right? So write out what you need for the method that you choose. And take a couple minutes. Okay, there's your 2 minutes. So would anybody like to share what you picked and what information you identified as necessary as input to that prioritization method? Who'd like to share? Yes.
So one of the things that came up with was, in advance, before we even start looking at any ideas, what are your business goals, and force them to rank those business goals. So that each and every time when you do business value, you have a quantitative method versus an emotional, passionate.
So let me see if I can capture that. You want to do business value prioritization, and in order to do that, you need a strategic level prioritization of the overall business goals so that you can check against those. Okay, excellent. Who else has something to share? What if you want to do weighted shortest job first? Anybody choose that? How about cost of delay? Anybody choose that? Anybody choose HIPPO? What did you choose? Business value. So what do you need in order to prioritize by business value?
Definition of what value is.
Okay.
Agreed on definition of what value is.
Agreed on definition of what value is, and do you mean by definition, do you include estimate of?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Cost-benefit analysis. Okay. So cost-benefit analysis requires 2 inputs, right? You need an estimate of the benefit, you need an estimate of the cost. Typically, when we talk about estimation, we're talking about cost estimation, right? But that's a very incomplete picture. And so it's hard to use that as a sufficient basis for prioritization. In the case of the team that I worked with, we ended up doing cost-benefit prioritization, and the stakeholders managed the exceptions to that. There are always exceptions. The example that comes to mind in this case is, or in this context, is that there were some legal requirements. Users were required to have a pop-up that they signed off on new terms of service, and that had to be done by date X. And so that jumped the queue, right? But they, for the most part, stuck to cost-benefit analysis. And they used this information. So this is what a work item looked like on our Kanban board. So we had the name of the project, we had the team, we had a description, we had dependencies, we had an owner. That was the big thing for us, always have an owner, because they were the one who had to answer all the other questions about this. And then we had BV, which is business value, and LOE, the cost estimate. Okay, and that was the basis for the discussion. And then we had notes. And that was an interesting adventure in itself, because some people put nothing there, and some people wrote voluminous essays there. And we discovered the need to find the right level of detail, right? That actually takes some time to shake out. Another reason to push and get this set up very quickly, because there's all sorts of shaking out that happens downstream from that, right? Some people are writing all these details, and then some stakeholders wander over and say, you know, can you just cut out the noise, please? We don't care. Great, so you have to find the level. The main things for us in this context were we did agree on a method. There had never been an agreed method before. And based on that method, we prioritized things top to bottom on that board. We decided to go top to bottom because we didn't want to put one team down here. So on that basis, then we had those conversations like with that senior VP who said, what is this thing down here at the bottom? Why would we even think about doing that? That has business value, but there's no way that rises to the level of making the cut. And so then we ended up, one of the first things that happened is one of the stakeholders said, I want to draw a line here and say everything above this line is going to be implemented by day X. Okay. And that didn't really happen, but what did happen is we drew another line, first one that said, everything above here is actually in flight now, being worked on. And then we drew another line below that that said, everything below this, we should consider dropping. Right? So we actually got that benefit of things being dropped from the backlog. Now, what didn't work? What didn't work was that there were still a whole bunch of black ops projects. In this case, there was a very strong personality in charge of the technology group who felt that it was imperative that he come in and make sure that all of his projects got done and didn't really feel compelled to put them on the board. So they just went back channel. And you can imagine what the impact was on the flow here, right? It gummed up the works pretty badly. Things were stopped all over the place. So what did we do? Well, we started highlighting the blockers. So we found the loudest, most obnoxious colored sticky we could find, and we would put up the blockers. And if something got blocked for a period of time, that went into the notes section. If something was delayed for a week because a resource got borrowed, that went into the notes section. So that later on, when somebody said, why did this take so long? We could look at that and say, well, this happened, this happened, this happened. It's an interesting thing when you do this, because when you start highlighting dependencies and blockers, the thing lights up like a Christmas tree, right? And no one can pass it without getting sucked in. It was terrific. Now, some of those stickies disappeared late at night, had to be put back. But the discussions had begun, and so that was the big breakthrough for us. The thing lit up, and everybody engaged around it, and the discussion really began in earnest. All because we had put this up, made this visible, made this transparent, and focused on prioritizing. So the last component here is alignment. And if you take one thing away from the talk today and ignore everything else, I'd like it to be this: alignment is a practice, not a state. Alignment is not a state that you achieve and then you have, but rather it's something you have to constantly maintain and adjust, because circumstances change, environments change, business environments, business conditions and landscape change, people's minds change. This is very akin to the change in backlog that occurs between sprints after you get your feedback from your stakeholders at the at the review session at the end of a sprint. You get feedback and that changes your plans. This is very similar, and that reaction in the backlog, in a product backlog to stakeholder feedback, is a kind of realignment. And what we're talking about here is just that writ large, right? And the reason it's so important to focus on the practice and not the state is that understanding that changes how you approach this. It means that you approach this by setting up that cadence or that rhythm of maintenance meetings and communication. So in our case, we had a regular meeting, which we'll talk about in a minute, but what I want to do with you first is say, where do you in your organization lack alignment? So let's go to the northwest quadrant, call that alignment, and write out your ideas about where you lack alignment in your organization and rank them with your table. So there's your 2 minutes. Let's do one quick addition to this. Why don't you write up your agenda for an alignment meeting? You've figured out what you need to do to align, how you'd like to approach that. So what's the agenda for that? Who needs to be there? What do you need to touch on? What things do you need to accomplish? What outcomes do you want from it? Just take 2 minutes and quickly write that agenda.